Ladies and gentlemen, there's no better way than to start off 2022 with the reigning, defending LWF World Champion in his first interview before the big match coming up here this Saturday against Jack Roberts of Synergy. Ladies and gentlemen, for those on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Sportnarium.com/player, I bring you our world champion, Raynaldo. Champ, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Tom. Good to be on the show again. Thank you, my friend.
I tried to invoke a little bit of Paul Heyman because I watched Raw this past Monday, and I'm like, let me at least try to do that Paul Heyman reigning, defending LWF World Champion Raynaldo, because you are our Brock Lesnar. I think I said it last week. Forget Brock and Roman. Forget Hangman and Bryan Danielson. Forget about Brock and Bobby Lashley. The match I'm excited about more than any other match right now is this Saturday, the LWF's first event of the year, the Winter of Discontent. And you've got an opponent. I mean, listen, this is an opponent that this might be a toughest challenge any world champion can face right now in Jack Roberts. Jack Roberts, we have spoke about quite a bit here on this show, my friend. And I'm going to go right into it because obviously I've spoke about this match a couple of different times with Wildfire Nate Reese. And I want to get your perspective on now the big match this Saturday, Winter of Discontent, your first title defense against a man, again, like I said, he's red hot. He's on a big winning streak. And is Jack Roberts of Synergy. Set the tables for us.
Well, yeah, first title defense, first match of the year. It's going to be a big one. Jack Roberts, I think I'm really looking forward to this match for a number of reasons. I think it's a massive opportunity for us both. I think me being the champion, it's my first title defense. And I heard some of Nate Reese's comments about title defenses, which we'll get to later, I'm sure. But if we focus on Jack, I think it's an opponent I've never been in the ring before with. And I've been studying his tapes this last week, trying to get some sort of insight into how he might approach the match. Every match is different. Even if you go in with the same guy a number of times, every match is different. So I've been trying to have a look at how he moves in the ring. He's very technically astute. He knows his way around the ring, and I know he likes to start, especially with some technical wrestling, and I like that. Would he have an advantage as far as technical wrestling goes with me? Possibly, but I know a few holds myself. I know a few holds, and I think the thing with Jack as well, he's been on this streak. He's kind of. I don't want to say being slept on because he's been given the opportunity that his streaks deserve. But at the same time, being a part of a dominant faction like Synergy, he's kind of not in the. I don't want to say he's in the background, but the big guys take center stage.
Oh, well.
He kind of probably in one regards gets sort of left out of the conversation a bit, but at the same time, he wouldn't be in a faction like Synergy if he wasn't good.
No question. And obviously, listen, the other 2/3 of Synergy, we've had them on the show. We could clearly see why they're advertised all over the world. But Jack Roberts is definitely under the radar. We've spoke about Jack Roberts here in the past because he wrestled the asset Stephen Cross. So we're familiar with Jack Roberts and his style. And from what I've seen from Jack Roberts, and speaking with obviously Cross because he wrestled him, and Nate Reese because he saw the matches, obviously, like you did. I think that this is an opponent, though, that blends kind of well for you, but also could give you some trouble in the fact that he's tough, He likes to start his matches early. He likes to generate offense. I mean, this is a guy that you really can't take a day off or take a break for any given moment. He's certainly different than when you were in the ring with Mr. Carter, where Mr. Carter needed every advantage, every hook and cranny he needed in order to be able to get the upper hand. No, Jack Roberts is going to go right at you. He's going for the jugular. He's going to go out there and not let you up at any given moment. So in that sense, I mean, are you prepared in the sense that Jack Roberts is going to give you literally everything he possibly can and maybe even the kitchen sink?
Yeah, I'm definitely prepared for that. As I say, in my mind, I know for him, this is a massive opportunity. A championship bout for anyone is a massive opportunity. And as I say, I've watched his style. I've watched how he moves in the ring. I even watched that match you spoke of, Jack Roberts versus the Asset Stephen Cross, just to see how he sort of goes against different opponents. And we mentioned his technical ability, his technical capabilities, but also one thing that you can't sort of forget about is his participation in Mosh Pit Mayhem. Kind of a similar thing to me in the street fight with Nick Cutter. So not only has he got that technical ability, as you say, he's a tough guy. But I'm not going into this bout to have one title defense and be done. I want to keep this belt for as long as I can. And certainly I'm not taking him lightly at all. I know the kind of company he keeps. I've seen his matches. I know this isn't going to be a walkover by any stretch. I've got my work cut out for me. I know that. But, as I said before, if anyone wants to try and take this championship from me, they're going to need to bring a lunch.
Oh, no question. And you are, again, the reigning, defending LWF World Champion, and you are certainly at the top of the table. So we know it's going to be no picnic for Jack Roberts either. But this match is so intriguing to me, Champ, for a number of different reasons. Because, again, I think there are some similarities between you and him. And I think that this is what makes this a really, really intriguing match. Because we were thinking about this here when you came on a couple of weeks ago. We didn't know who you were going to be in the ring with. I mean, Jack Roberts, you talked about the fact he might have nothing to lose here. You've got a lot to lose in the fact that you just gained this championship. You hadn't been a world champion in 10 years. I have to say that he might be one of the most dangerous opponents you can square off with, because what Nate and I were talking about is the fact that this guy really under the radar, hadn't been talked about in title contention, and yet it's been almost 10 years since you've had a world championship defense. I mean, how much have you thought about the situation? Because sometimes you see this in wrestling where you get the championship and all of a sudden you lose it. I mean, I got a Kevin Nash shirt on very famously 27 years ago. Bob Backlund was champion. He beat Bret Hart in kind of a controversial fashion in Survivor Series. And a few short days later, Diesel wins the championship in 8 seconds. So Rob Van Dam was another example. Way back, he was the world champion after he beat John Cena. He was the ECW champion, and he lost both titles in a matter of days because of something he did. Unfortunately, he did something that he shouldn't have did, and he lost the titles, and he was never the same afterwards. So we know that there's a lot for you to lose here with this championship. I mean, have you thought about those scenarios here? I mean, talk to me about that.
Absolutely. Just linking back there, the Survivor Series, is that when a towel got thrown in for Bret Hart? But Owen
Hart was too hard to throw the towel. Yeah, I'm sure we're going to get into that. We're going to definitely get into that.
So regarding my title defense, of course, I've thought about it. I mean, anyone can be beaten on any given night. As soon as you step through those ropes, anything can happen. But in my mindset, you mentioned Nate Reese, and I heard the comments he made about, he didn't specifically say that I would become complacent, but there could be complacency when someone has done the journey, got to the top, they've got the belt, that's it. What else is there to do in that regards? But for me, I've tried to flip the script in the sense that I've got to stay hungry, because I need to prove myself as a worthy champion. I don't want to be the guy that they send into like the dog of war to go and take out the people that they don't want in the title picture. And then as soon as I've done that, then I lose the belt and I'm back to the bottom of the pile again. I'm not that. I don't want to be that guy. I want to hold this belt, and I've got a point to prove now more so than ever, to keep the title, to put in a performance that makes people think, you know what, Ray's got to the top and he belongs there and he deserves to be there. It wasn't just a one-time deal, you know, and it's been 10 years since I had a title defense. My last title run did not go how I wanted it to go, for a number of reasons. But yeah, through injury, and a number of other things. And then I was sort of, as soon as I lost that belt, I was sort of put to the side, wasn't given a chance to reclaim it or anything like that. And that hurts. And I don't want to relive that. So I've got very big motivation to prove myself as a champion here and to keep hold of that belt and to make sure that if and when I do lose that belt, that the person that takes it from me deserves it and deserves to be in that spot. And they're going to have to work really hard to take that from me. That's my goal here. And I really am gonna be, you know, more, I want to say fighting more so than the street fight, but because I've got such a point to prove, it's gonna be tough to take it from me.
You said something interesting, and I want to go back to that because we didn't really speak about that the first time you came on, just after you won the world championship from Nick Cutter. You talked about the fact that the first title run didn't go the way you hoped, and it had been 10 years. We talked about it and how big of a deal that was.
Yeah.
Have you gone back and thought about it and said, you know what? These are the things that went wrong, or conversely, these are the things that went right, because you did hold the world championship in Future Shock Pro Wrestling. That is a big deal, especially for those in the UK. You were a big deal at that time 10 years ago. So you still did hold the title. You hung on to it for a little while. I mean, again, hate to bring up Bob Backlund, but as we know, Bob Backlund, it took him 11 years to reclaim his world championship.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure he thought about, okay, what went wrong, what went right. I was out of wrestling like you for a long time. I mean, you were out of wrestling not as long as Bob Backlund, but how much have you thought about the first title run going into Saturday night and saying, these are the things that I need to do differently, and these are the things that, you know what, I did right, and this is what's going to help me in terms of preparing for coming away with the W and retaining the championship Saturday night?
And that's why you're so good at your job. What a question. What a question. No, seriously, that's a really good in-depth question. Have I thought about it every day since I lost that belt? I've thought about that run, thought what I could have done differently, thought of if I got in this position again, what I'd do. Of course, I wouldn't say it haunts me at night or anything like that, but I've replayed that period of my life and career many, many times. And I won the belt. You know, and I was over the moon at the time. And just after that, I slipped a disc in my back. So I wasn't in a great spot physically. So when I came back to defend it, I'm not making any excuses because it's not ballet is the phrase. That was weighing. It was weighing on my mind a little bit. But it is what it is. I lost it fairly quickly. And I like the way, because the similarities you've drawn, the parallels between the Bob Backlund run and myself. I'd never considered it that way. I wouldn't say I'm as crazy as Bob Backlund, but I'm halfway there.
He didn't run for prime minister either, like Bob Backlund tried for president years back.
Well, and I've often wanted to not relive it, but there's stuff, if you could rewind the tape, you might do a little bit differently. And now that I have that experience, on one hand, a really fantastic experience of holding the championship on one hand, and then on the other hand, losing it fairly quickly, it's made me, as I say, it's added that fuel to my fire to want to keep the belt. So it's going to help me in that regard. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah. Tactically, I'm a different wrestler now than I was back then. More experience. I'm watching the new generation come up, and I'm seeing what they do well. But yeah, I've got experience on my side, and I have used that title loss from 10 years ago and the journey back up to the top to fuel my passion to keep this belt.
We know that you are definitely not going to want to lose that belt, and I hope that you don't lose this belt because
Thank you.
it would be such a shame, such a crying shame, that you get this title and lose it a few short weeks later. Listen, we don't want you to be like Bob Backlund. Listen, at least, champ, don't lose it in 8 seconds. Whatever you do, if you do lose to Jack Roberts, whatever you do, please don't lose it in 8 seconds because for whatever reason, during the WWE Network throughout the last month, all they've been doing is showing the replay of Kevin Nash in the biography, Two Dudes with Attitudes, and all they've done is show Kevin Nash beating Bob Backlund in 8 seconds. So whatever you do, listen, don't even do finger poke of doom way back with Kevin Nash and Hulk Hogan, whereas all of a sudden the finger poke of doom and 5 seconds later, Hulk Hogan's the champion. So Hollywood Hulk Hogan, I should say. So obviously, whatever you do, don't have those things happen to you. We can certainly understand why you might lose it. Jack Roberts is a worthy opponent. But ladies and gentlemen, these are reasons why we are very honored to have our top of the table, our reigning, defending LWF World Champion, Raynaldo. I am the host of the Sports Report and the station manager here of Sportswire Radio, the Reverend Tom Bryson. Of course, if you like what you hear from the LWF, please give the LWF a follow on Twitter at LWF. Also on Instagram at the LWF Wrestling, like the Facebook page at LWF. So make sure you get involved. Saturday is coming up here, the Winter of Discontent, and the main event. Like I said, forget about the Royal Rumble, forget about Brock versus Bobby, forget about Hangman versus Danielson, forget about whatever Roman does after he gets out of COVID. This is the match that you want to find a way to watch. If you're in the town of Clory, go and scrounge up 8 pounds, 10 pounds, whatever it might be, and see this man wrestle. I can assure you, you are going to get your money's worth. So make sure you get out there and talk to him and see him in the crowd. He loves the crowd. I can tell you that. Raynaldo loves the crowd. So there is no better relationship, I think, with the fans than Raynaldo. Not like the asset Stephen Cross, who we know he has a little bit of an issue with children, but obviously Raynaldo doesn't. That is why we are honored to have him here once again, just literally days before the big match. Just about, I'd say, from now, maybe 72 hours, even a little bit, just under that, before the big match here. Going over then, now that you've been the champion, and going back to what Nate Reese had to say, we'll get into some other things for sure. But do you feel now a sense that people are treating you differently? Whereas before, we had you on, it was still the euphoria of winning the championship.
Yeah.
It was almost like everybody was still wrapped up in that moment. But now it's been a few weeks. Now we're going to Saturday. Now we're in 2022. Now it's no longer like happy-go-lucky about Raynaldo. No, it's about we want to take his championship. We want the gold.
Yeah.
Do you feel now, in terms of the wrestlers, they're looking at you differently now because now they want to take out. Now they are jealous of you. Now they want that gold. I mean, have you noticed that now since the last time you came on?
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad you specified the wrestlers about looking at me differently, because I think it only took about a few days before my wife and kids looked at me as just dad and husband again. But yeah.
No comment. I'm pleading the fifth on that.
That's okay, man. The locker room, though, yeah, there's a bit of a switch. There's a bit of a switch, of course, because like I said to you on our last conversation, not only do I have my name and number on the back of my shirt when I go to the ring, but now, because of this championship, I've got a massive target. And I also used a line from a rap song as well. These unsigned guys, I know they're signed, but they're hungry, looking at me like it's lunchtime. So yeah, there's everyone, the people that were happy for me are still happy for me, but they're like, you know what, maybe I can get a title shot down the run. What do you think about that type of thing? So there's a kind of bit of a side eye. Most people are still happy, who you expect to be happy for me. But yeah, there's a target on my back, and I sense people looking at me thinking, do I have a crack? Do I have a shot?
And the reason I bring that up, champ, is because you see this as a common theme in professional wrestling. Leave aside you being dad and being a husband and everything else. But in the wrestling world, you're a world champion. At the end of the day, I don't care who it is, whether it's Nate Reese, whether it's Gorgon, whether it's even Isaiah Quinn in terms of managers, or Stephen Cross, anybody else I speak with. The one goal you have is to be a world champion. So everybody in that dressing room right now is jealous of you. No matter if they're on your side or not, they're jealous of you. I don't care if it's Nick Cutter. I don't care if it's the Wrecking Crew. I don't care if it's the Synergy Boys. I don't care if it's Shining Wizard. I don't care if it's everybody in that dressing room right now.
Mm-hmm.
They're jealous of you. They want to be in the spot that you're in right now. So you might have friends, but you know what? In a sense, I don't know how many friends you really have in that dressing room because you're now the guy. I mean, you see it all the time. Stories in professional wrestling. When somebody gets the belt, all of a sudden, it's different. It's just different. I mean, you got to go into this now knowing that, you know what? You can't trust as many people as you did. Even everybody that lifted you up. Even everybody that was happy. Because now, again, every wrestler in that dressing room is jealous of you.
And you're completely right. Massively. Those people hoisted me on their shoulders when I won the championship because the euphoria, the crowd was so into it. I still get goosebumps thinking about it now. It's amazing. But now, would I be so ready to let people lift me on my shoulders? Would we have that evolution moment where I do the thumbs up, thumbs down? You never know. And even we go back to the friend of the show, Nate Reese. He made a little comment. He's known me, apart from the It Girl, Melanie Price, shout out to her as well. Apart from Nate Reese, one of the people in the locker room, he's known me the longest. And even he made a comment to you, I heard in one of your conversations saying, give him a little idea. Maybe it's not beyond the realms of possibility that he could have a championship run. Mm-hmm. So is he got designs on challenging?
And he's a 15-year plus veteran, and his luck in the LWF has not been as good as yours. And he would love to make a name off. Listen, Nate Reese, I love Nate Reese, but in every promotion right now, he's trying to make a name for himself, and he hasn't found his footing right now. He's struggled with that. You, on the other hand, have done it. You've come back. You've gotten back to the mountain. You pulled it off. Love Nate Reese, but Wildfire Nate Reese has struggled to find his footing, especially in the LWF. He would love to make a name off you.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the point there. Exactly. Proving your point. Now, I love Nate and he's very talented, and I'm surprised that he's not found his footing. I think once he does find his groove, he's gonna be up there. He's gonna be massively in the conversation, and who knows, maybe he will challenge me for this one day. But how will he go about it if he gets to that spot? Will he come at me head on, or will he go the Nick Cutter route and and just blindside me? Who knows? But
he powerbomb Gorgon out of nowhere. I mean, who's to say that anybody could come after you at any given moment? I mean, you don't know about Bob Costin. Bob Costin could come after you, his tag team partner this Saturday.
Absolutely. Bob Costin, we've teamed before, as you know.
Yep.
And
sure do.
He's another one that again that the LWF crowd seems to be quite behind, and again a guy that I like and respect. But again, because I have this championship, everyone wants it, so it's like friendship kind of goes out the window to a degree, depending on how they want to throw their hat in the ring, so to speak. Exactly.
Listen, there was an old WWF In Your House pay-per-view, and the title of that pay-per-view was Good Friends, Better Enemies.
Better Enemies, yeah.
So you know what? You might have good friends, whether it's Bob Costin, whether it's Nate Reese, but in their minds, they might be better enemies to you. And the main event of that event was Kevin Nash, Diesel, versus Shawn Michaels for the World Championship. So listen, I mean, you got to be careful. What I'm saying is, you got to tread lightly right now. You got to really tread lightly because of these different people, because they're definitely envious. They want your spot because they know with your spot, it becomes interviews like this, recognition all over social media. Everybody, listen, I go wherever I am and people tell me they heard Raynaldo. They know that you're now a name in America. They're in your name, a household name right now in all different followings, because I got over 1,000 friends on Facebook, 3,000 followers, almost 600 followers on Instagram. I saw how many people viewed my Instagram story of our interview. I saw how many people checked out my post. People definitely know what you're doing. And I'm sure that every wrestler in that dressing room wants that same publicity. They want that attention. So they're definitely envious of you. And I almost have to ask you this question before I get into some other things. Synergy. I know they're not the Wrecking Crew, but in some cases, they might be more dangerous because we've seen what they do. We've seen the size. We've seen the strength. Are you watching them very closely in terms of will they come outside interference? I mean, Synergy, I know, is not the Wrecking Crew,
No.
but those guys, I mean, listen, they could want to make their guy champion. There's no question that they would love to have their guy to be the champion. What a feather in the cap would it be for Synergy? I mean, are you watching them in terms of outside interference? Is there any thought of that coming to play?
Of course, I'd be stupid not to. Those guys, I think the whole Synergy group as a whole over recent months have, I don't want to say turned over a new leaf, but they have a slight shift in attitude, so to speak, for the better, I would say. But the three of them, I know we're focusing on the two guys not directly involved in the match at the moment. The three of them are so talented, but those two in particular. Now, do I see them getting involved in the match? I don't know. Do I see them being at ringside to cheer their man on? Possibly. And if they do come to ringside to cheer their man on, would they be able to withhold their sort of wants to get involved to make sure their man's the champion? Because you got to remember as well that Synergy, the duo, have a chance of becoming tag team champions. So could you imagine, as you said, what a feather it would be? Imagine that whole faction holds gold. What kind of motivation have the three of them got for three of them to hold championship gold? So do I think they'll be involved? I don't know, but there is a big motivation for them to be in close proximity to that match, to try and maybe grease the wheels and ensure that their man gets a championship belt. Possibly.
Oh, listen, can you imagine that? Listen, we don't want to give any ideas out there to Synergy. And listen, we know Ryan, we know Anderson. I mean, we don't want to give them any ideas, but their guy, Jack Roberts, is the world champion. They're the tag championships. Obviously, we are going to crown a new tag team champion here in the LWF. I'll let that bridge cross in itself later on, but obviously that's something else to watch here. I mean, they could be one of the premier factions because we know the Wrecking Crew definitely took a step down. They definitely took a step down at the Fight Man for Christmas between their own problems with Stephen Cross, obviously, Nick Cutter not getting the job done, and he admitted his failures, so obviously they've got their own cross that they have to bear. So we'll certainly see what happens. And obviously, again, we are talking all things related here to the LWF and our top of the table, Raynaldo. Raynaldo, I got to ask, because we were talking about this at the end of the first interview, and I want to get your thoughts on it now, because obviously we're thinking about all these wrestlers. We talked about a few different names. I mean, it could be whether it's related to this match or not, but I mean, what were some of your favorite matches that maybe you were watching growing up that maybe inspired you to be our world champion?
Wow. Match-wise, it'll take me a minute to come up with some matches, but I had I think about this off the back of our last conversation about wrestling influences. And
it could be same thing. It's probably going to be the same thing, practically add up in different wrestlers, but
yeah. So I kind of broke it down into small periods of time or small eras. I know WWE called the Attitude Era and all the rest of it, but yeah. So, as I said, the first match that got my attention for wrestling was Hogan Warrior, because I'd never seen wrestling before, and I happened to be at a friend's house, and it was on, and I was like, "Whoa, what's this?" And then, as a kid, I think I was about 8-year-old at the time, you see these characters, superhero type guys, huge muscles, come to life, and you think, "Wow!" So that's what kind of got my attention, was the Hogan Warrior era, and you had the Big Boss Man, and I used to like Mr. Perfect. You know, the SummerSlam.
Yeah, Mr. Perfect was great. Mr. Perfect was great.
So as a kid, you kind of gravitate to these wrestlers that perhaps now that you as someone who wrestles, you would probably look at some of the other wrestlers of that era and think, actually, now that I'm older, I think I prefer those guys. So like Hogan and Warrior for a spectacle was great, right? But then when you look at the work of someone like Mr. Perfect at that era, and say the Rockers as a tag team and the Hart Foundation, now I appreciate them more than those guys. So I'd say Hogan Warrior got me into it for wrestling wise. And then moving on, you had the Bret Shawn debate. I was always a Bret Hart guy.
Yeah, I always lean toward Bret, although later on, as crazy as it sounds, I kind of appreciate Shawn Michaels more. But at that time, in the Attitude Era, at least up to a certain point, I was definitely 100% pro Bret, I have to say. Now, I'll be honest with you, I might be like 50-50, but definitely in that time, I was 100% Bret Hart. In fact, I had a Bret Hart poster. I feel like I still have it somewhere in my garage, but I had a Bret Hart poster. It was one of my most treasured possessions. I had a Bret the Hitman Hart poster, and the poster, and I've said this before on the air, the poster was actually him standing on the ropes after he had beat the 1-2-3 Kid on Monday Night Raw. In fact, that was a match I think that me and either Nate Reese or Stephen Cross spoke about here. So I was Bret Hart all the way.
Yeah, and that's it. That sort of change in attitude towards him is kind of mirror to me, because I was Bret Hart all the way, but now looking back at it, I really do appreciate Shawn Michaels' work. But Bret Hart still would probably be my guy. But Shawn Michaels' later work,
I think the fact that he was able to come back after 4.5 years and give us like 6 or 7 years of really, really good matches. And I love Bret again, but Bret's run, if you think about it, as a world champion main eventer, it's really 5 years. It's just a 5-year run. He had that run in WCW, but like kind of mixed feelings. But that run, WWF, where he was the world champion the minute he beat Flair, even before going back to the British Bulldog Bret Hart, because that is one of the greatest matches, no question. But his run, it's really 5 years. It's 5 years, where Shawn Michaels had his run, and you think about it, he had a longer run the second time he came back, and look at all the different opponents that he was able to go and score off, whether it was John Cena, whether it was Goldberg, even Triple H, obviously all those historic matches. Rey Mysterio, he was in a match with. Obviously, after Eddie Guerrero died, Kurt Angle. Could never forget about the Undertaker matches again. I mean, there were so many matches. Chris Jericho, WrestleMania 19. I mean, there were so many matches that Shawn Michaels had to me that almost, I don't necessarily quite give him the edge, but at least give him 50-50, because it was so impressive what he did. Because when he wrestled against Triple H in SummerSlam 2002, we didn't think he was going to have a 7-year run. It was basically a street fight, one more match, and if we saw him 1 or 2 more times, and went back to his being goofy commissioner and dancing around, we'd have been okay with that. But we got 7 years practically from Shawn Michaels, and he retired Ric Flair.
I was there for that match. I managed to get to WrestleMania for that match.
Really?
In Florida. Yeah, I was my first and only WrestleMania.
Wow!
What an event! And we got to go to the Hall of Fame the night before, and we got Raw the next night as well. So it was amazing. And so I remember that very well. Ric Flair versus Shawn. I'm sorry, I love you. Boom, and that was it. Done. It was amazing. Very emotional. For to be there, it was great. And then to have the Raw the next night, and they all came out to the ring for Ric Flair as well. And then when the cameras are off, the Undertaker comes out to show his respect. That was I'll never forget that. That was amazing. Yeah.
Although I will say one thing, I'm going to make you chuckle, and probably those who are watching, listening to this, eventually chuckle. Ric Flair should have just made that his last match, because unfortunately, like a lot of wrestlers and a lot of athletes, you come back and you punch drunk, and he had that goofy run in TNA. A little bit. Then he was on, if you remember, the Hulkamania tour. Remember they had the Hulkamania tour, and it was in Australia. It was big in Australia. I don't know if they came to the UK, but they were definitely in the Australia. And he wrestled Hulk Hogan like 20 different times, and it was almost like, Ric Flair, you had the perfect way to go out. You wrestled Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels revered you. It was probably one of the best matches you've had in like 20 years. You should have just stuck to it and retired, and that was it. But yet he hung on, and like a lot of wrestlers. I mean, unfortunately, Mankind, Mick Foley was another example that he should have stayed retired. I know he had a few great matches with Edge and ECW and different things like that, but he should have stayed retired, honestly, after WrestleMania 16, where they let him come one more time, and that he kept coming and coming and coming and coming. And sometimes with wrestlers, unfortunately, you just don't know when to stop. And unfortunately, those are examples of those who should have stopped, and they just didn't stop.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. I kind of see the reason why they want to come back, because there's nothing like when you.
Well, I'm sure the money's very good.
Of course, there is obviously that as a motivator.
More than what Steve Bibby pays. A little more than what Steve Bibby pays.
Probably just a little bit, not much. Not much more, but there's nothing quite like when you come through that curtain and your music playing, and then the crowd just erupts. From that snapshot in time, I can imagine you do want to chase that a little bit, apart from the money side of it, which is probably the big motivator. Like, yeah, it's a shame in some ways because, like you said, he had a great send off. He managed to get his WrestleMania main event and that. But yeah, like you said as well, he did have a couple of good matches. That street fight with Edge. And did he come back and have like a Legends match with Randy Orton or something?
Well, yeah, I think the Randy Orton match actually was before that because if I recall correctly, my memory serves me well. WrestleMania 20, it was Evolution versus The Rock and Mankind, or AKA Mick Foley, whatever you want to call it at this point. He changed his name so many different times, and he's the first person to admit you that. But I'm pretty sure that his feud with Randy Orton was prior to ECW One Night Stand with Edge.
Okay.
So, but he came back a bunch of different times. And there was even the one goofy segment they had in 2008, if you remember, where I think it was Mankind and Ric Flair kind of were battling with each other it out. And then it went to TNA, and they wrestled in TNA, and then Mick Foley wrestled a bunch of times. In fact, he even held the world title in TNA for a brief period. He actually held. He beat was it with Sting or Kurt Angle, with somebody. He held the title briefly, and he wrestled a little bit again. And they'd be the first to tell you it was more about the money, and they did it. And some wrestlers. That's why it's going to be so curious to me to see if the Undertaker actually stays true to his word and says, you know what? I'm done with it, because we didn't see the Undertaker in 2021 at all, practically, anything, which was kind of rare. We're always used to seeing the Undertaker. So I'd be so curious to see if the Undertaker will kind of stick to his word. I mean, Sting has come back, and Sting has been able, I think, to kind of get it right so far. They've put him in the right situations. But again, you think about our time, our era. I mean, going back to Bret Hart, because I want to go back to Bret Hart, as I have a Kevin Nash shirt on. I always thought that Kevin Nash, a.k.a. Diesel, his best matches were with Bret Hart. I think about King of the Ring 94. I think about, obviously, the finishes, Survivor Series 95. And then I think about In Your House right before WrestleMania, the cage match, where Diesel gets pulled out under the cage from the Undertaker, and Bret Hart claws out. I mean, I always think that the peak of Kevin Nash, even though, listen, the NWO, no question, the match with Goldberg, and there's a lot to dissect there for sure. But I feel like that the peak matches of Kevin Nash's career were actually those 3 matches he had against Bret Hart. What do you think about those matches in that?
Yeah, I remember that time fairly well. But he did seem to work with the smaller guys like Bret, as you said, particularly well.
And Shawn as well, obviously. But I thought the Bret matches were just, I liked them more for whatever reason.
Yeah. I remember him getting pulled under the ring and things like that. And I remember just prior to that, there was at the Royal Rumble, was it 95? It was Undertaker versus Bret. And Kevin Nash came out and got him disqualified and flipped in the bird as he's walking away. And I was like, he just gave him the middle finger to the Undertaker, because I was like, wow. But yeah, they were. I would agree that they stand up quite well. I'd say they probably were his best matches, I would have thought, with Bret. Yeah, definitely.
I definitely think they were, because I feel like that. Yes, I mean the matches with Shawn were good, but that was also, it was a great lead-in, because the first match he had with Bret, it was like, okay, wow, this unknown guy, he holds the Intercontinental title, but you really didn't see him as kind of that guy, and that was the first glimpse. In fact, he actually beat Bret Hart in that match by countout, if I recall correctly. So he actually won that match, and it was like, wow, okay, this guy is this giant. He was this like unbelievable giant. Sure, we had the Undertaker. Sure, we had Yokozuna. We had Sid. We had Vader in WCW. It was like, wow, this guy, he looks like just a total badass, and he led him to obviously holding the world title. I mean, he wins it, and then obviously, it's a big deal. And in fact, if I even recall correctly, if I'm mistaken, they wrestled 4 times. Was it Diesel versus Bret Hart was 95 Royal Rumble as well, if I'm not mistaken. In fact, they had 4 matches. I think was it 3 or 4? Or no, actually, no. It was no, it wasn't. For whatever reason, I'm thinking for whatever reason they might have had 3 or 4 different, maybe 4 matches. But the fact of the matter is that this guy became believable. It was like this guy and him and Bret Hart, we hadn't really seen a match like that. A short guy and a giant. Well, not that Bret Hart was short, but it was like you had really something that it really was a foreshadow to the future, a foreshadow of things to come. I mean, that's why I thought it was really, really great how they told the story of those matches. And I also think about Bret Hart, that was one of his strengths, was he was able to tell a story in his matches. I know you're a world champion. We know that you're trying to tell a story as well, but I think if you are going to be a pro Bret guy, that was his biggest strength, was that he could tell a story with his matches.
Yeah, definitely. For example, as well, if you remember, is it King of the Ring '93, where he says it himself, but when you go back and watch, you can see it. He had 3 different style of matches in the same night. You know, with Bam Bam was Bam Bam in the final? Was it where he victory?
Yes, it was Bam Bam. I think was it Mr. Perfect was one of those matches. I think.
Yeah, because he ripped his singlet, didn't he? Yeah. And I can't remember who the third guy was.
Was Mr. Hughes in that? Remember Mr. Hughes, that brief run? I think Mr. Hughes was one of the other 3 opponents, if I recall correctly.
I'm not sure. I'll have to go back and have a look now with the glasses and the hat, Mr. Hughes.
We'll get the crack staff on it. As you continue to talk, we'll look it up. Don't worry. We'll make sure.
That's cool. But like we were saying there, he told 3 different stories, as if you will, in one night, and that's amazing. And if you look again, the different style of matches he had with Shawn Michaels, again, you know, you had the WrestleMania 12 one, the Iron Man match, which was phenomenal. And then if you, again, being a pro Bret guy, it's just to show the dichotomy. You've got the screw job in '97, the kind of knockout, drag out fight they had.
Well, I have to ask you about that after you're done speaking. So now I'm going to have to ask you.
But then he did a similar sort of thing with Stone Cold at WrestleMania 13 with the street fight and things like that, where he could just mix it up in various different styles depending on his opponent. And the as you said as well with Nash, the big guy, little guy dynamic, he did so well. So he's really up there for me as an influence and as an all-time great, so to speak.
And you were correct, because the crack staff did look it up. In fact, Bret Hart's opponent, Mr. Perfect, which was the semifinal. Obviously, the final was Bam Bam Bigelow. Gets kind of overlooked, I think, when it comes to big men in professional wrestling. He was always one of my favorites. And he actually beat in the first match Razor Ramon, which I forgot about that, because I always kept thinking about Royal Rumble '93 for the championship between Bret and Razor, and I didn't realize that Razor and Bret wrestled in the King. I forgot. It's been so long. And then obviously, of course, Owen Hart beat Razor Ramon to win the King of the Ring
the following year.
So kind of ironic there, but I got to ask you, because you did bring it up, Survivor Series 1997, and people are going to be talking about that until the end of time, and there's documentaries here left and right. Everybody has an opinion on it. So I got to ask you, because we were definitely peak wrestling fans at that time. I mean, what did you think of all of that and how it went down? Because you're a world champion, so I definitely have to ask you about that. So I certainly hope Steve Bibby isn't screwing you on Saturday. So I have to ask you, I mean, talk to me about all of that and just your overall reactions.
Wow, I remember when that all unfolded, and then subsequently watching the Wrestling with Shadows documentary.
Yeah, I remember that as a kid watching it. It was like, wow. I remember watching it on A&E in 1998 or 99.
Yeah,
and it was like, wow. I couldn't believe like you knew all this stuff. You would watch as a kid. It was like you didn't know all this backstage stuff, and it was like, yeah, that was pretty eye opening.
Exactly, and you know, from. Don't want to sound, you know, however you'd call it, but at the time, I wasn't sort of smart, shall we say? And you take it for what it was, and then you start, the curtain starts being peeled back, and you think to yourself, "Wow, how did all this happen?" Like you said, it's all eye-opening stuff, and it was just shocking to me. And then, as the years have gone on, I started, you know, trying to rationalize. Not Vince McMahon's perspective. I kind of, for some small glimmer of, see what he was kind of thinking from a business perspective, but from a human point of view, for a guy that had worked for you for so long, who'd up until that point been so professional, and as you said, he never missed a date through injury and things like that, or missed one date. How that you wouldn't give him the benefit of the doubt to come back the next night and sort of, you know, but that, you know, there's a lot of stuff to consider. At the time, I was very pro Bret, watched the A&E documentary thinking, how can they do this? But then as time's gone on, I've opened my eyes a little bit more.
That's exactly how I think, because 20 plus years ago, you're like, wow, this guy, he's a hero, and he's been there all his life, and his family's in wrestling, and how could they do it to him? But then when you take a step back, and I'm curious because you're in wrestling now, you've been very successful, you're a 2-time world champion. I mean, in one sense, I mean, if you're employed by someone, they ask you to do something. I mean, in any walk of life, right? In our regular jobs or anything else, if somebody tells us to do something, well, we have to do it because they're signing the check, right? So in a sense, theoretically, and I would have to think, I mean, looking at it now, 20 years later, and I don't want to give Vince McMahon full credit on all this, but I mean, how could at the same time he asked Bret Hart to do something, he signed his checks. I mean, it's a belt. I mean, there's no question that it means something, but couldn't they have worked something out? Or maybe it just, to me, I would have to think now, looking at it, because you're a wrestler, you're a world champion. I mean, maybe you see things a little differently. Talk about now as a wrestler, not as a fan, because I heard your fan side of it. Now you're a wrestler. You've been in this promotion, this professional wrestling line of work for a very, very long time now. I mean, do you see it differently? I mean, do you see where Vince is coming from now, more so because you're in that shoes?
Yeah, I think that's what, as I was alluding to before, as time's gone on and being involved in it, I can see to a point more so now than I did back then why he made that decision. If I was in, hopefully I'm never in Bret's position regarding that type of situation, I'd like to think that, if we use Steve Bibby as Vince McMahon, damn it. I'd hope that if there was ever a sort of a disagreement with, let's say, me and Steve, if I use that as a real life example, that he would have enough faith in my integrity that he would let me do what I said I was going to do if I was in the Bret Hart position type of thing, because I wouldn't be that type of guy that would say, I'm going to do this, and then I'll show up on another promotion with the belt, like, Well,
it happened, don't forget Alundra Blaze. Remember, I know it's a long time ago, she was the women's champion, and then all of a sudden she showed up on WCW TV and threw the women's title in the garbage. I mean, from one sense, I mean, Vince McMahon, maybe he thought, you know what, how can I trust Bret Hart, even though he says all the right things? He signed a contract with the guy that's beating me each and every week on the ratings, and he wants to take me out of business. I mean, not to say that I'm defending Vince McMahon on everything he's done, because he's done some questionable things. But in that standpoint, I mean, he's my world champion. I can't let him walk away with the championship. How can I know that he's going to come back the next night? Or there was one scenario I read many, many years ago, obviously now, that Bret was going to hang on for like 2 months, and they were going to go with all these scenarios. And then there was one scenario that maybe he dropped it by a disqualification. And like, you never hear of a champion dropping a championship by a disqualification, a world champion, nonetheless. I mean, so some of those things, in one sense, maybe from the back of Vince's mind, how could I trust this guy? I mean,
absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head, and that's when you go forward and start thinking about these things. All right, he has a contract, but his contract ended the next day, I believe. I don't know, but we're speculating his contract ended. So, what kind of ramifications would Bret have incurred had he not followed through with what he was going to do and walked off? And like you said, he'd already seen one of his championships put in the bin.
That wasn't that long. It was 1995. That's not even 2 years before that. So, I mean, there had been a president. And then I listened to, unfortunately, all these documentaries, and I listened to Bruce Pritchard, and he actually said that Bret Hart had negotiations with WCW 5 years prior.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how can you trust necessarily everything fully that the Hitman said? And then, I love the Hitman. I love watching. I'm sure hindsight's 2020. He should have never went to WCW, because afterwards they have him come in. And he's that goofy referee in that Sting Hogan match. Then that was a fluky ending, and then they put the title up and made it vacant. And then they never really put Bret Hart in a position to shine. Then obviously his brother Owen dies in between that. And the only moment I really felt that Bret Hart really shined was that moment with Goldberg with the steel plate underneath the jersey.
Yeah.
Other than that, it was like his WCW run was forgettable. He holds the championship, then he gets hurt in the match with Goldberg, and then that was it. So if hindsight was 2020, I'm sure Bret Hart would have just found a way to stay in the WWF at the time. Because his WCW run, I mean, it was so unforgettable. I mean, people talk about CM Punk and his run in AEW, but Bret Hart's run in WCW, I remember it. There was one match he had in particular. It was a throwaway match on Nitro against Booker T. There was no fanfare, no nothing. I love Booker T, don't get me wrong. But Booker T beat him clean in the middle of the ring, and it was like Bret Hart, ho-hum. Bret Hart was the second 5-time WWF champion in history. And he basically comes out a little over a year later on Nitro, and it was like, no fanfare, loses to Booker T. That's how far his career fell. So I'm sure Bret Hart, if hindsight was 2020, should have just stuck to the WWF.
Massively. How did they drop the ball? He's coming in with so much publicity off the back of the Montreal thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
He's coming in. He's one of the biggest names ever in wrestling, and you just let him go down like that. I remember 3 things about Bret Hart in WCW. I didn't watch WCW as heavily as I did WWF at the time.
I was kind of more of a WCW fan, which I always got so much flack for. But talk to me your thoughts. Go ahead.
No, so that's cool. And that's the beauty of wrestling. I was a WCW guy, and then you had some guys that were, no, I'm ECW, WWF, and WCW. They suck type of thing. ECW's where it's at. You had those guys as well, right? So you did. I had this one guy off the record for a second, and he used to walk by my house after school, and he'd knock on my door and he's like, "Did you see ECW last night?" I was like, "No." And he'd proceed to tell me the results of the ECW show and tell me how good it was, and I should be watching that instead of WWF. And then he'd go home, and every week it was the same. But yeah, so going back to Bret in WCW, the only 3 things that I remember about Bret was the hockey jersey with the steel plate under, like you said.
Yep.
Unfortunately, the much replayed kick to the head that gave him a concussion from Goldberg, which again wasn't a pleasant thing. And then there was one match of his that I liked, was on the tribute show to his brother.
Temple Arena. Yep.
And
October the 4th, I think that was 1999. My memory is very photographic, so I remember it very well.
Yeah, so that was one match of his in WCW that I watched, and I was like, wow, what a great match, I thought at the time. So yeah, they were my memories of Bret in WCW. I didn't really watch.
It wasn't much other than, I mean, I could have threw out there Sting and Bret Hart, Halloween Havoc, 1998, Wolfpack Sting. That would be maybe honorable consideration. But other than that, his run, it was unforgettable. They had him on WCW Saturday Night at one point.
Yeah.
They had him Thunderman. They had him wrestle DDP 100 different times. And Lex Luger, they traded the U.S. title a couple different times, if I recall correctly. They had the Giant with him. He was in NWO, and he wasn't in NWO. Yeah. And it was just goofy, to say the least. I mean, so Bret Hart's run was definitely unforgettable. And you talked about ECW, because obviously I have to bring up ECW very quickly, because obviously from New York, ECW, that was the Mecca. And as a kid, I remember ECW wound up becoming, in the year 99, 2000, that was my promotion, because as a kid, I was in high school, and we did tape trading. And there was a kid that was in my drama, and then he was in my music class. This big kid, looked like he could have been a wrestler. It was Adam Freeland. And I used to buy the ECW tapes off him, the VHSs. This is 20 years ago plus now. So VHSs, for those who might not know what a VHS is, look it up, do a Google search. And VHSs, what was great about what this guy Adam would do is he would burn all these matches. And I would watch guys like Rob Van Dam. I would watch guys like Sabu, Taz, Shane Douglas, Lance Storm. And I was like, wow. I mean, and that's how I got into ECW. And then what would happen is you would have in New York, you would have WCW Saturday night at 6 o'clock Eastern time, which would be 11 o'clock your time. Then we would play, it would be on channel 55, which was kind of like a hole in the wall cable TV station, and you would get either WWF Shotgun Saturday, or you get then it became Metal and Jacked, and then afterwards, if I could keep my eyes open, there would be ECW on the MSG network, usually about midnight. So I would say between 6 o'clock to like 1 o'clock in the morning every Saturday night, I would try to keep my eyes open just enough to watch all of that wrestling. So I used to love, that's why I didn't quite hate any promotion. I used to love all of it because at that time, I mean, now it's come back where you have AEW, you have Impact, you have WWE, but for that period, for like, I'd say 2 years or so, you had ECW, WCW, WWF. Then what I used to like most, which you probably didn't have it in the UK, was Friday nights for about, I'd say a little over a year or so. ECW was on quote unquote the Nashville Network, TNN. And they would play ECW Friday nights. In fact, one of the main announcers for it was Don Callis. Don Callis was one of the main announcers for it. They had Joel Gertner at the time, a local guy, and Joey Styles. I used to love watching it. It was like I wouldn't quite say it was a watered down ECW, but it wasn't like the ECW you'd see in One Night Stand and Living Dangerously and November to Remember, but it was still ECW. So I used to love Friday nights also from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock because we would get ECW, and then you're going to chuckle right afterwards, we'd get Roller Jam. So it was kind of like a kind of funny thing. But I used to just love watching the different companies. I used to love, even as a kid, they used to have for a very brief period, for about, I'd say 2 years ago, they had a WCW Worldwide. And WCW Worldwide used to come on Sunday afternoons. Usually it was about 12 o'clock. And if it was baseball, I'm a Mets fan. And they used to play the Mets on the same station that they played WCW Worldwide. So you get a Met game at like 1 o'clock. And as a lead-in, you get WCW Worldwide. Or if it wasn't 12 o'clock, I'd make sure I wake up early enough. Or if my parents didn't go to church, I'd make sure I didn't go to church and watch WCW Worldwide at like 11 o'clock in the morning. So you could watch a recap of all these shows, and then you get like one match. If you were lucky, like Chris Jericho would be on, or like Eddie Guerrero. Yeah. But it was still like, that's how I loved watching wrestling and all the different forms of wrestling. What was it like for you then in terms of, I told you my setup. I know you kind of touched upon a little bit of it when we had you on a few weeks ago about watching Monday Night Raw and stuff. But in terms of the other outlets, I mean, how did you find a way to watch these different companies?
So it was really weird. As a kid, for years, I used to have to rely on my uncle to record Wrestling Challenge on VHS.
I remember Wrestling Challenge, sure.
Yeah, so I used to get that recorded once a week or once every 2 or 3 weeks. If I was lucky, if I saw my uncle, he'd give me another tape. Or if I went round to their house and it happened to be on, I'd get to see Wrestling Challenge or Superstars. And then when we eventually got cable, I started watching Livewire.
I remember Livewire. That was Saturday mornings. We used to play it here. Yep.
And then when we moved up to Manchester, it took us a while to get sort of cable TV. And when we did, you were talking about Friday nights. Well, Friday nights is when we got our WWF Raw. We didn't get it on Monday.
Yeah, I had Rick Marcus on. I think Rick Marcus told me the same thing. That was how he watched Raw, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, so once like we started becoming more aware of like the WCW, WWF sort of rivalry and the Monday Night Wars, I think WCW used to creep onto cable TV over here. We had Worldwide a week delay. I think it might have been on a Saturday afternoon back in the early 90s. I remember the British Bulldog being on it once back then. And then we started hearing rumors of ECW being on that like stupid o'clock on a cable channel. Kind of like the same experience if you got. This is where this kid that used to live around the corner from me, he used to watch it and get the magazines, and he used to come round and say, knock on my door just to sell me on ECW. And then there was this one place in the centre of Manchester called ECUK, I believe. And they used to sell wrestling VHSs and DVDs, and they had all the ECW stuff. It was kind of like underground. You'd go into it as a really sort of like small shop.
What they would call now a hookah lounge.
Yeah, so I'm guessing so. It's closed down now, but you could go in and you'd probably feel a bit sort of dodgy asking, but you go, hey mate, have you got that new ECW tape? Yeah. Or have you got a pay-per-view? Like there was a couple of pay-per-views you couldn't get, but they would be able to rip them onto a DVD for you to get, that kind of, it's kind of a take trade type thing, but you could buy VHSs and things like that. So that's how we sort of, how I got it exposed to it. But I was mainly a WWF, WWE guy, because that's kind of where not my loyalties lay, but that's what I'd experienced growing
Well,
up.
WWF always, one thing I will always give the WWF credit, and even now WWE, is they always had great main events. Whether it was, we talked about Bret, whether it was Shawn, Undertaker, Diesel, then obviously Stone Cold, The Rock, Mankind, Kane. I mean, Ken Shamrock was in the scene for a little bit. Then Chris Jericho, Kurt Angle. WWF, the reason that they obviously overtook, in my opinion, WCW, was they always had by far superior main events. I think sometimes for me, WCW had a better like overall card because they had like, again, the Eddie Guerreros, the Rey Mysterios, the Billy Kidman, Juventud Guerreros, Jericho, Dean Malenko, Chris Benoit. Obviously, we can't really mention his name much now, what happened, but Chris Benoit before he kind of grew into the main event scene, but they always had like more overall talent. And then ECW just had the pure like a rock and roll show. It was like pretty much like, we're gonna give you everything and just throw it out there and see if you like it. But the WWF always was good at main events. No matter if you didn't like the card or if you loved the card or if you loved that company, they always, to me, had far superior main events. That's, to me, the one hallmark, I think, to this day of the WWE.
Yeah, absolutely. You've hit the nail right on the head. I mean, I couldn't put it any better because you made me think there about some of the talent that they had in WCW, but then a lot of the WCW talent either went to ECW or came from ECW, like your Guerreros, your Jericho.
You know what? Everybody, you know what doesn't get talked about? There was a lot of ECW talent that went to WCW or conversely to ECW. A lot of talent that everyone talks, WCW, WWE. No, ECW had a huge footprint on WCW as well. A lot of names.
Massively. Think of the names that went through there. Was Dean Malenko, I think? Did he go there?
Dean Malenko was there. Chris Benoit, Chris Jericho, Juventud Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, Foley, Bam Bam Bigelow was in ECW and WCW. Raven, I know Raven had kind of a little bit of forgettable run in WCW, but he was like the first big ECW name to go over into WCW. I mean, there was a number. Listen, there was a long list of names. I mean, Perry Saturn. Perry Saturn was a great tag team wrestler. He was in ECW, went to WCW. It's a long list.
Yeah, and lest we forget as well how I think how he got noticed, Stone Cold, with those promos he did while he was injured.
Yeah, good point.
There's a like you said, there's a litany of wrestlers that have cross-pollinated across all three companies.
Lance Storm was another one. He was one of my favorites.
Absolutely.
Mike Awesome, forgettably Mike Awesome.
Yeah, so it just goes to show how important ECW was to the overall landscape of professional wrestling. I don't think it gets overlooked, so to speak, but I'm not sure it gets as big a credit as it deserves, if that makes sense.
I mean, WWE definitely puts their stamp on it, and obviously the relationship between Heyman and McMahon, and we found out years later that essentially McMahon was paying ECW to stay alive, but we didn't know that as kids growing up in the late 90s, that ECW was basically being paid, and Vince McMahon was feeding Paul Heyman money to kind of eventually feed that talent to eventually go over to WWE, but we didn't know that at that time. We thought this was this hardcore, underground, third company that I had to stay up till like 2 o'clock in the morning to watch, and I had to go and give like $5 or $10 to my friend at the time to go and give me an ECW tape, because at that time you couldn't buy ECW VHSs like you could now and go on WWE Network. I mean, it was like, wow, I had to go out. It was almost, again, like I've had bands come on the show in the past, and it was like bands that would talk about how they got into music, and they would go to then at the time, a music store and look for cassettes or CDs and just listen to things. And that was like ECW. That was the last vestiges of that era where it was like, you had to go out and find this company, find them, and just, wow, okay, whether it's on the MSG network here, whether it was another channel that you had, or ECW, UEC, UK, whatever it might be, that's how you had to find these different companies. And I got to mention it before I change topics here, Mike Awesome, because as you know, I'm sure you're aware of this because you are a world champion. Mike Awesome is a part of history because the only time that we saw an ECW champion who was going to be a WCW wrestler wrestle at the time WWF wrestler was, of course, Taz, because Mike Awesome was the ECW champion. He was leaving to WCW. He had signed with them, and then we had Taz, who was a WWF wrestler.
Going the other way.
That was the only time that we saw that in the entire run of ECW, WCW, and the WWF. I mean, that was kind of cool in a sense. It was weird, but it was cool.
No, yeah, it's amazing to think of all these things that at the time they hyped up a bit, but when you look back, it's like, wow, that really was big, massive.
You didn't think about it, but at the time, you're in an ECW ring. You have a WCW wrestler who's the ECW champion, and then Taz is a WWF wrestler, and he left ECW a few months before that. He's coming back, and he wrestles Mike Awesome, and that ECW crowd, because I remember it like yesterday. Boy, Mike Awesome, he was lucky he got out of there alive. The ECW crowds aren't the LWF crowds, where the children are all cheering, and they love Raynaldo. No, that ECW crowds, usually, they were pretty much saying things that we couldn't say here on the radio, things we couldn't say on here live. I mean, I'm surprised that Mike Awesome got out of there alive, and then right afterwards, we actually saw Taz wrestle the WWF champion at the time, Triple H. So we saw in the same week, we saw the ECW champion against the WWF wrestler who was going to WCW. Then we saw the ECW champion wrestle the WWF champion. And unfortunately, the WWF champion, Triple H, made Taz look pretty weak. And basically, he made that championship worthless on SmackDown. And then that was pretty much the end of anything really of ECW right afterwards.
It was. And Taz's run in WWF wasn't very good after.
It was worse than Bret Hart's in WCW, because at least Bret Hart held some titles and he had his name. But Taz's run, he came in, debuts at the Royal Rumble, he chokes out Kurt Angle. Then the next night they say, oh, it was an accident, it was illegal. And then afterwards, Taz, like, he never won a real match again after that.
No, it was such an impactful sort of debut, like you said. He comes out and Angle at the time's up there, and then you think, wow, he's on for big things, and then it just.
And Angle hadn't lost at that moment when Taz came. He was undefeated.
No, exactly. It was such an impactful debut that like you said, you thought, right, the former ECW champion Taz, with like the mythical Taz, he's going to come and do something here, and then it just. I don't know whether it was injuries and stuff or just,
what I think it was? I'm going to be honest. This is what I think. And a lot of wrestlers had this stigma. And we're talking all things related here to the world of professional wrestling and our memories here with, of course, our LWF World Champion, Raynaldo. And, of course, everybody give the LWF a follow on Twitter at LWF, Instagram, the LWF Wrestling. Also, like the LWF's page on Facebook as well. And I am the host of the Sports Report. And the station manager here of Sportzwire Radio, the Reverend Tom Rice. Got another about 25 minutes or so with Raynaldo going down memory lane here and speaking all things related to the world of professional wrestling. His big match upcoming this Saturday at the Winter of Discontent against, of course, Jack Roberts of Synergy. But this is what I think happened with Taz. It happened a lot of times with a number of different wrestlers, whether it was ECW or WCW. He was short, number one. Taz was short. He spoke with an accent, a New York, Brooklynese accent. I'm from Brooklyn, so I could say it. He had an accent. He didn't quite shake that off. That was the first thing. He was the short, stubby guy. And Vince McMahon has a certain look. Now, Rey Mysterio pulled through. Eddie Guerrero did. Chris Jericho, Chris Benoit. But they were different in the sense that they had charisma. They had a certain look. And they had a massive following internationally. But there were certain guys that came in. Raven was another example, whether it was WCW or WWF. Perry Saturn was another example. Certain guys, I think, they either had a stigma to them or they didn't have that Vince McMahon quite look. Because Vince McMahon is not Steve Bibby. Vince McMahon has a certain look, and if you don't meet that look, you're done with. Look, DDP was an example. I was watching the DDP Broken Skull session with Stone Cold. DDP's run in WWF, I mean, DDP was one of my all-time favorite wrestlers, and he had maybe like the worst run of any wrestler in one promotion. He had that stupid stalker angle, then he had the Positively page, and they was done. I mean, so there were certain wrestlers, like they came in, and they had a stigma, and they were done with. I think that was the problem that Taz had, a number of these different wrestlers that they had, champ.
Yeah, agreed. They again, I think... if we look to more recent times, people like, again, Keith Lee, who they've just let go.
Man.
You think to yourself, wow, what are you doing? Let him go. But going back to Taz and DDP, DDP's a great one. I'm halfway through that Broken Skull session as it goes.
Okay. I won't spoil it for you then.
No, it's fine because I think it's quite well documented, isn't it? I remember that run he came in because he was stalking the Undertaker's wife at the time, Sarah, and then he just had that big grin all the time, and it was like
goofy.
Nothing like.
No, he was like you. He was like you because we know you have the photo with DDP. That's why I brought it up, of course. And the diamond cutter. He was like you, this blue collar underdog. Like, this is a guy you really wanted to get behind him, and then he comes to WWF, and it's like he's stalking the Undertaker's wife, and then he's basically this positive guy with Christian. I mean, get out of here. It was a joke.
Yeah. I hate it when you get guys with so much talent and so much promise, and then they just like you're excited to see them, and you're like, that's what you're doing now?
Cross. Listen, Karrion Kross, they bring him up to the roster. He's the NXT champion. He is just dominant. He's just, everything that you'd want in a world champion, what should be. He comes in there. He loses to Jeff Hardy in like a few short minutes. Okay, he beats him a few other times. Then he's wearing almost like this goofy like helmet, and he's got these goofy interviews, and it's like, what are you doing? I mean, Keith Lee, they did a documentary on Keith Lee. Keith Lee, I thought right now would be a world champion, and yet he's not even in the WWE. I mean, there are certain guys. I mean, even Samoa Joe. I know he came back and won the NXT championship, but I feel like Samoa Joe in Impact, he is like one of the best wrestlers to ever come out of TNA. And his WWE run, he did more as a commentator, frankly.
No, I just looking. I had a list of names here on my phone.
Run them by you, champ.
I will in a second, but Joe is on that list, right? And I just need to agree with you. His NXT run before he called up to the main roster when he was feuding with Finn Balor.
Yep.
I thought he looked really good then. Reminded me of his TNA days. And then he came up to the main roster, and I was like, this is what I've been wanting to see. I want to see Joe. Then he had that little feud with Roman Reigns.
He had that one little moment. Yeah, he was interjected into the world title run. He had a run with the U.S. title. Yeah, a little bit.
And then he had that thing with he had a match with Lesnar, I believe. Did he as well for the championship? And did Lesnar go over it? I'm sure he had a match with.
Yeah, he never won.
He never won. He never won the championship, but he had a main event match with Lesnar. And I was thinking to myself, wow, maybe they are fixing to do something with him. And then I don't know whether he got injured or whether they just went. But yeah, they ruined him. And I'm like, man, that's not Joe. That's not the Samoa Joe that I love and I think could be like one of your biggest stars. It's like, wow, what have you done?
I think it's also because they weren't made in the WWF. I'm going to give you a listen in a second, but I think a lot of these names, unless they didn't have the household massive following, if they weren't made in WWF or WWE, they had a tough time. I mean, AJ Styles, until recently, it was miraculous. He became a world champion and became as big as he was. I mean, because again, it's a long list of talent that they come in and meh. So you have a list. You got to hit me with the list.
All right. Okay. So knowing we're going to have this conversation, I kind of broke it down into eras, and then I had like a little offshoot. Okay, so so we talked about like sort of the olden days, like Hogan the Warrior. Then we had the new generation. I put Bret, Shawn, and Razor, and I interjected between those first two ones, Mr. Perfect, because he kind of spanned them both. We go to sort of these are like my favorite of this era for different reasons. So obviously the Attitude Era, everyone's going to say Austin and Rock. They massively sort of influenced me for different reasons. You can see I'm wearing a Rock t-shirt now, but I like it because like wrestling's a buffet. There's something for everyone, and I like these guys for different reasons. So I put Austin, Rock, Foley, and Taker in that sort of era. They were the guys I used to like to look out for in WWF at the time. I also used to like on the mic at that time was Road Dogg from the New Age Outlaws.
Yes.
Yeah, even when he went into the hardcore division when he split from Billy Gunn, I used to like keep an eye out on him.
He had the Intercontinental title, I think, for like a cup of coffee also, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, he did. And then he was in the hardcore picture for a bit. And I quite liked him in that run at the time. And then after that, was it the Ruthless Aggression era? They called it.
Yeah, because the documentary has been running throughout the last few months on the network. Yep. That was the Cena, Orton, Batista run. Yep.
So from that time, I've sort of highlighted Kurt Angle, Rey Mysterio, and obviously Eddie Guerrero. I love those guys at the time. Even like the work of a certain other wrestler that we don't sort of mention too much, but we mentioned him earlier. But it's unfortunate.
I shouldn't say it, but I do have a shirt of his still. I've actually kept a shirt. I get in a lot of trouble for it, but I still have that wrestler's shirt still.
It's difficult as well, because going off on the side topic, his son, was he on his son on the Dark Side of the Ring episode?
Yeah, his son, I think, was trying to be a professional wrestler, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, and you know, his name is what it is, and you know, he wanted to keep that name, but unfortunately, I reckon there's probably a stigma attached to it. But you know, I felt for him. But yeah, regardless of that, his father's in-ring work was very good. And then I sort of started watching Impact in the before Hogan and Bischoff got involved.
Yeah, 2007-ish, 2008. Yeah, that makes sense.
So I got a list of names from there. These are my guys from that era of TNA.
I'm a big TNA fan, so hit me with this, champ. Hit me with it.
Christopher Daniels.
Absolutely.
Fallen Angels. Okay. Samoa Joe, obviously. AJ Styles. I liked the look of Bobby Roode and the way he moved in the ring at that time as well.
Yes.
Bobby Roode.
Yep.
And then my two other names, there might be a couple of others, but the two that I've got on this list, three people actually, a tag team, Motor City Machine Guns.
And I think Alex Shelley won the world title briefly in TNA, if I'm not mistaken.
And I think Sabin held it very briefly as well. And then
Sabin's been a world champion. Yeah, Sabin's definitely been a world champion.
I loved there's two other people from this time as well, is Jay Lethal, especially when he was doing that shtick with Flair.
Yeah,
that's my line, and starts throwing his shoes at him and everything like that, doing his whole Nature Boy thing. And then a female wrestler who I liked to watch for some of her submissions that she does, Sarita, if you remember her.
Yeah, I do. I remember her. Yes,
I remember.
Wasn't she with Awesome Kong? Was that who I'm thinking of? Was she with Awesome Kong?
She might. I know she was with Taylor Wilde in a tag team for a bit, and then she joined LAX and had to wear a mask. Yeah, for a little while. But she stuck out for me because she was doing interesting submissions that kind of like takes on the Corey special. So yeah, they were that, and then moving on from there from TNA, they're not TNA guys, so to speak. No, the only other two names I put on my list were Punk and Danielson. And then you've got your Ciampas and your Garganos and NXT that I really like as well. And there's so Finn Balor as well. So many guys that came through the recent NXT that looked amazing, and then they come up to the main roster and just seem to.
Or in the case of an Adam Cole never came to the roster. I mean,
how good was he as well? Again, the Undisputed Era. I know they're in AEW now, but yeah, there's so those names on the list are the big ones that sort of stick out for me. There might be a few others as well that I didn't.
I got to give you my name. So obviously you talked about the rock and wrestling era, Hogan Warrior. I want to throw in Rick Rude. Got to throw Rick Rude in there.
Yeah.
I think Rick Rude was definitely very important. Also, how could you not forget, because he spanned also the new generation, the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase. Have to throw the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase, because he has maybe one of the most iconic theme songs. Macho Man, have to throw the Macho Man in there.
I've got him on there. I don't know why I didn't say him, but he's there.
Macho Man, have to throw the Macho Man in there. New generation, want to throw in there for our UK fans and UK wrestlers, the British Bulldog, because I always loved the British Bulldog, because the British Bulldog, again, to me, one of the greatest wrestlers, unfortunately, never to win a world championship. So at least you've won a world championship twice, but the Bulldog, unfortunately, to me, is up there as one of the greatest wrestlers to never win a world championship. Him and obviously Owen Hart. I think about Razor Ramon. I mean, there's a number of different wrestlers that have never won a world championship, and he's one of those. It's definitely a lot less of a list now because you have different companies and such, but those are my other names. Go into the Attitude Era, I have to throw in the tag teams. Edge and Christian, have to throw in the Hardy Boys, have to throw in the Dudleys. I also want to throw in Kane in there, because Kane was always, to me, like a great utility main eventer. He wasn't quite Austin, Rock, Taker, Triple H, even Foley for that period, but he was always on the peripheral, where you could slot him in a main event match. Very, very useful. It had a long run. In fact, Kane's run of being somebody in the main event scene was longer than Austin's, longer than The Rock's, certainly longer than Foley. Because you think about Austin's run as a main eventer was really like 4 years. The Rock's run as a main eventer, a world champion, really 3 years. Foley's was really like a year and a half to 2 years. Whereas Kane, like from the minute he became Kane, he had pretty much like a decade plus run. Triple H, have to throw in Triple H. I also got to throw in, again, D-Generation X, X-Pac 1, 2, 3 Kid, because he had a nice little run. Again, X-Pac sucks. I mean, think about the cheap heat. X-Pac sucks. X-Pac sucks.
Yeah.
So have to throw in, I think Kurt Angle you mentioned. I think of Kurt Angle as both the Ruthless Aggression and the Attitude Era, because he was one of those wrestlers that like Chris Jericho. Chris Jericho and Kurt Angle, to me, kind of spawned both eras where like their runs were like in peak attitude, but also certainly carried over significantly into the Ruthless Aggression. Going into Ruthless Aggression, I think did you have Orton? Because I have to throw Orton in there and Batista. Batista.
I didn't have.
God.
I didn't name them. But Orton, because he's still going now, and I think he's probably doing some of his best stuff.
Well, Orton, Orton has like all the records for like matches and pay-per-view matches and wins because he's just been there so long. I mean, we think about Undertaker and the 30 years, but the Undertaker, if you remember, he would take off for a while because he got injured. The Undertaker, he had the mystique. Orton pretty much like has wrestled since the beginning of the RNN days when it was the Randy Orton News Network. He's pretty much been like on TV consistently for like 18 or 19 years. So Orton and the other wrestler from the female end of it that transcends almost all these eras, and I have to mention it because we speak of the Harts, Natalya.
Wow, yeah, definitely. She's the wrestling royalty right there, isn't she?
She's really the one. I mean, we talk about Bret, but Natalya has probably had more matches in WWE than Bret did, believe it or not.
That should be a pub quiz question. Which of them has the most answer?
I think it's Natalya because don't forget Natalya's run has consistently been on pay-per-view and on TV for over a decade consistently. I mean, Bret
shows us.
Yep. Wow. I mean, Bret is Bret, and Bret is obviously a national treasure, Canadian Hall of Fame, all that stuff. But Natalya, the last, I want to say like 13 plus years, about 13, 14 years, she is consistently, she's never injured. She's always on TV. I mean, she's there. So I actually think she has the record for most matches, certainly from the women's side, but even WWE history, she's right up there. I mean, Natalya, got to give Natalya a lot of credit. So I think like she's another one. You think about how long she's been in there in terms of like her run, and the crack staff is looking it up as we speak because I'm thinking about her run and it's like, it's historic. I mean, she's been there in terms of just all her accomplishments. I mean, I definitely think if you take a step back, she has more matches in WWE than Bret because Bret's run, I want to say, was 84. Because I remember him in WrestleMania 2. So Bret's run, if you think about it, WrestleMania 2 to WrestleMania 13. So everything in there. And in fact, the crack staff has given it to me. That's why we get the big bucks here. She actually holds the record for female WWE wrestlers for most pay-per-view appearances, most matches, and most wins.
Wow.
So there you go. So Natalya, got to throw her in the discussion for all these different wrestlers that have spawned. Anybody else you want to throw in here, champ, before I ask you a few more thoughts on your match coming here Saturday?
I'm just trying to think now because you've thrown a number of names out there that I really like as well. And when you mentioned Kane, how for that initial run as well, you're saying that he was a utility guy, but he was a very, very believable threat to any champion because the mystique that he came in with initially, and even when they demasked him to that point, and whether you liked it or you didn't.
Oh, Mike! Speaking of things we can't mention now.
No, that was that was terrible. That was very bad. But yeah, he's really I think he does get overlooked, Kane, doesn't he? But yeah, throw some more names out.
I have a few stats I'm going to throw out there, and believe it or not, thanks to the crack staff, the wrestler with the most matches in WWE history is Kane, 1,728. Second, believe it or not, I didn't realize this, was the Big Show, actually 1,482. And I forgot about the Big Show. The Big Show was one I have to mention, but I always felt in a lot of ways that the Big Show, I don't want to say he was a disappointment because he had a very, very strong run in WWE, but I always felt like I considered him like the next tier. Like you mentioned, Austin, Rock, Taker, Foley. Then it was the Ruthless Aggression where it was Cena, Orton, Batista, and then later on with the era of obviously Punk and Danielson or Daniel Bryan, Seth Rollins, Roman Reigns. I always felt like he was like the next tier. So maybe I didn't recognize him as much. And then obviously that's another reason why I kind of didn't mention him. I mean, other names, Dolph Ziggler. I have to throw Dolph Ziggler in there. I mean, he's kind of like one of those utility guys, and he's definitely in the list. I mean, I mentioned Edge and Christian. Sheamus, have to mention Sheamus. I mean, Sheamus has done his best work, I think, these last couple of years. So Sheamus would have to go in there. Another guy. In fact, he's also all-time. So the all-time, you'll be curious. Now I got to throw this out there. For the top matches of all time in WWE history. So 1,728 is Kane. Big Show, a.k.a. Paul White, second, 1482. Dolph Ziggler is right behind him, 1481. So he'll be second. He's third. Randy Orton is fourth, 1445. Kofi Kingston, have to throw Kofi in there. He's sixth. He's fifth, 1429. Cena and The Miz are tied at sixth. I'm sure The Miz will break that coming up here either next week or soon. Sheamus is eighth. R-Truth is ninth. I would not have guessed R-Truth. Yep, R-Truth, who I remember going back as K Quick and Ron the Truth Killings in TNA. He's actually ninth. 1161. 10th is Chris Jericho, because Chris Jericho's just been around for like 100 years. He's at 1122. Cesaro, 1120. Seth Rollins, 1,058. Then Natalya, 1,056. And nobody on the female end of it is even close to her. Nobody's even near. So she's going to shatter those records. Obviously, also, again, a couple other names I didn't think about. Obviously, Jon Moxley. I mean, I didn't think he had that many matches in WWE. He had 1,012, so I have to give him a shout out. Obviously, yep. And obviously, Dean Ambrose in WWE. Jack Swagger, 1,011. The Usos are up in there. Roman Reigns, 998. Matt Hardy, 986. Undertaker, 22nd, 948. I never guessed this one. I mean, Zack Ryder was actually 20th all-time in WWE match history, 977. Really? Yep, Triple H is 25th, 886. And Bret Hart's not even anywhere near the list. In fact, Bret the Hitman Hart, he's actually, I'm looking at it now, he's 88th, 440. But these are lists, you never know what's out there, but I have 440. But yeah, that's a lot to digest there. I mean, there's some names that I didn't even realize they had that many matches. I mean, I didn't even think that, again, the Usos had that many matches. I didn't even think that Sheamus. I mean, time flies. We're getting old, champ.
Oh, definitely time is flying. I remember Sheamus making his debut, and I remember even seeing Sheamus on Irish Whip Wrestling over here. Yep. It was on the telly. And
well, how about Nikki Cross when she was here wrestling overseas? How about that, right? She's been now for years in W. How about another name, Pete Dunne? Remember Pete Dunne came out of here? He was in Pete Dunne was in KOW for a brief moment, and yet we see him all the time on NXT.
Yeah. It's crazy to think about this time going forward and all these people.
How about Nick Aldis for our UK fan? Remember, Nick Aldis was a baby in TNA, and he's
with Doug Williams.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Massive. I remember they were the British Connection or something they were called.
Yes,
or the British Invasion. Invasion. It was him, Doug Williams, and a Welsh guy. Rob was it Rob Terry? He was called.
Yes. Yep. I remember Rob Terry very well.
Yeah, but I remember Doug left TNA at the time, and then Nick Aldis, or Magnus as it was called then, wasn't it? They split. And he get a short run with the belt before he left TNA?
Yeah,
he was actually quite
he definitely was a world champion in TNA. He definitely had the world title because I think he beat Sting, if I'm not mistaken, in TNA. I'm pretty sure he holds a win or two over Sting. I'm almost like very certain of it. And I think he was also in. Was he also in the Main Event Mafia at some point? I think he eventually got into the Main Event Mafia. Or he was in one of those big stables. I'm almost certain of it that he got in their event. They eventually accepted him, or was I know Joe was in there, but he
Joe was in that. Yeah,
Joe was in there, but he was a guy that I had to throw him out there. Just to me, was like a big, especially for our UK wrestlers or UK fans. Man, I got to mention, I always like to work the UK names, and I want to say this because you'll appreciate this. One of my all-time favorite wrestlers was the British Bulldog. The reason I always loved the British Bulldog because he had like the sheer strength. He didn't need to speak on the mic. He could just go in the ring. He could be strong. He could punch. He could do a number of different things, technical stuff, but he was believable. That's why I always loved the British Bulldog. And he was almost a versatile wrestler, one of the most versatile wrestlers I could think of. And another one I loved also, before you get a British Bulldog comment in there, William Regal. Have to throw in William Regal.
Absolutely. The British Bulldog was beloved over here, especially in the early 90s when SummerSlam 92 was coming over. The newspaper articles about him, he was in the papers loads. I even liked him when he did his second run in WWF, when he came and he was wearing the jeans and stuff and different music. I know
I love this song, by the way.
So it's a good rendition.
I try.
Of course. His second run I liked as well. Probably for different reasons, but than his first, because in his first I was more like younger and I loved the fanfare, and he's a big guy, and the Intercontinental Championship win at SummerSlam was amazing. So as a fan and like an English guy winning the belt, even though it was Bret Hart, unfortunately, because you're a Bret Hart fan as well. But that was great. So the Bulldog, I really like the Bulldog. And then you say William Regal as well. How good is William Regal? I know he did more. He didn't have too much wrestling in WWF.
I think, you know what? At the beginning, I mean, if you're thinking about the first run, he's a man's man. But the second run, he did have some success. He was a part of the stable with King Booker when King Booker
held the world title. Himself as well.
Yep.
King Regal.
He was tag team champion a few different times. I think he even held the U.S. and the Intercontinental. One of those he held. No, he had some run. I know it wasn't like what we thought it could have been, but considering his life and reading his book, I think he had a good run in WWE as a wrestler, as an actor.
Definitely. I'm just sort of thinking, would his WCW run been better than his WWF run in your opinion?
I think WWF run was by far better, and here's why I'm going to say it was better.
Yeah.
Because the WCW, I know he had the television championship a few times, and he had a nice little run there, but I felt like at the end of his WCW run, the first time he was there, it was like, man, he was like an afterthought. It was like then when he came back after Lord Steven Regal, he was there for a cup of coffee. I think at the end of the day, if you look at his run, not what he's done at NXT, but I'm talking about his run on the active roster, he had some really, really good matches. He had his runs with Eddie Guerrero. He had his runs with Chris Jericho. He was a part of with King Booker. He had a number of different matches where I thought he stood out very well. He was a commissioner there for a little while. I mean, I think at the end of the day, if you look at his run, I see what you're saying because he had some great matches in WCW, no question. I think about Steve Austin. I think about an early Triple H. I mean, he had some great moments in WCW. I think even Stingy had a match or two, if I'm not mistaken. But I think his run to me in WWF, WWE, I do think it was memorable. And I think that considering what it could have been, I think he, by and large, had a good run in WWE. I think it was a good run.
No, I'd agree. I was just, I didn't see much of his WCW stuff. So with you being a WCW fan, I was interested in the comparison because I do remember him, as you say, I'm sure, as you said, get the Intercontinental Championship. I remember him being King Regal. I remember that scene of him just being sat on the throne, like, when he won it. I remember that was to stick out because I used to look at his character work in WWF a lot more and his, the way he sort of carried himself. And I used to like his technical ability, really, really great technical wrestler. So that's how I think a lot of us guys over here look to him for that. But I think, I don't know, what I'm guessing is I feel a bit disappointed in the sense that, the club thing where they kind of belittled. I felt they belittled him a bit by getting into Kiss McMahon's. I know it's part of the show and stuff like that. I get that, but and he said he's happy with it and stuff like that. That's cool. It's just I think that's what kind of not takes the shine off it because his work speaks for itself. But you start.
It's like Eric Bischoff was the same thing. Vince McMahon throws him in the garbage truck. I mean, I get it. Like there is a point to that. Like it's like. It kind of cheapens them a little bit, but I still feel like Regal's run in WWE. I mean, I think about the tag team runs with Tajiri. I think about the match with Rob. Yeah, he was. I think they were champions twice, if I'm not mistaken. There were a couple of times they were champions. They had a good run with the championship. I mean, he had, by and large, he was
that.
Yeah, King of the Ring. You mentioned King of the Ring. He was European champion a couple of times, if I recall correctly. I mean, he had a good run. I mean, I think by and large, like his WWE run, I mean, I think he was in matches with the Dudleys. I think he was in matches with Tess. I think he was in matches. I mentioned Rob Van Dam. I think Christian. I think he was in a number of different really, really big matches. Chris Jericho, I talked about. Al Snow. I think Raven, he mixed it up with a few times. Kane, I think he was in the ring with. I mean, he had a good run. I think his WWE run,
you're right.
I think it was a good run. WCW, listen, the Blue Bloods and all the success he had there. But I feel like toward the end of his run in WCW, it was like he just, unfortunately, what happened was he had that goofy, the first WWE run with Lord Steven Regal, the man's man. Remember that? It was the goofy kind of run there. That was, I want to overlook that, but certainly I think at the end of the day, his run by and large in WWE, I still think was very successful. WCW was good. He held a few championships. He had some great matches, absolutely iconic matches. But I still think by and large he had a good WWE run. So I think William Regal, Steven Regal, whatever you want to call him, different companies, different names, it was still a positive run nonetheless. So don't feel too bad.
No, you've sold me on that one. You've reminded me of a few things that I'd forgotten, especially the Tajiri stuff and that. I've got a lot of time and respect for William Regal. I remember when we were at WrestleMania that year, my sister used to get me to go up to people and say, "You'll be facing this man, you manga," because he always pronounced the name wrong. And then he's some like American guys would turn around and go, "Ha ha, yeah, you manga."
That's pretty much that. Yeah. You got the Regal look a little bit even. You got the look a little bit. The Bulldog Regal look. The short, the haircut, the look. You got that. You got it. It's good. And I'm a fan of both. So trust me, this is a compliment. Trust me. There's some wrestlers I wasn't fans of. I always appreciated the work of the British Bulldog and certainly the work of William Steven Regal. I always appreciate it. In fact, for our UK fans, before we get closing thoughts from you on the Jack Roberts match and a few other things, I always loved our UK wrestlers. I always loved, even before I'm doing this for 3 years, I always appreciated our foreign overseas wrestlers. I always had an appreciation for the European Championship, and I was always a big fan of that belt. So I have to say, for our fans and wrestlers that want to come on, you even had a few people message me while I'm speaking with you. I have always been a fan of everybody in the UK. So one of my things on my bucket list, one of these days, certainly after the Omicron and everything else with COVID, is to come down and watch you wrestle, watch everybody else in the LWF and the other companies that support us. So it's on my bucket list. So I definitely want to come down and visit you guys.
Hey, if you do, man, I'm going to speak to Steve Bibby and get you on color for the show.
I'm all in. Listen, if Steve Bibby wants me, I mean, listen, we're not going to take any pounds from him. If he wants to have me on the commentary, I'm happy to do it. We'll definitely, anything Mr. Bibby would like me to do to help him in the company, I'm all in for. So whatever.
I'd love that. You, Mikey Fitzgerald, and
well, Mikey Fitzgerald messaged me actually while we're speaking, and we're going to get him on the air. So we're going to bring him on.
Excellent. Shout out to Mikey, because as well, throw back to one of your earlier comments with ECW. I think he's quite influenced by ECW.
He messaged us. Yep.
Yeah, and if you can find it on the LWF page for some of our past events, he's responsible for editing a lot of the promo packages in the ECW style, where they had the old Pulp Fiction music.
Yep. I remember it.
Yeah, he's done his own twist on that regarding some of the
past LWF. What's funny? You said that before I get closing thoughts from you on the Jack Roberts match. I could see a little bit of that in the LWF, and there's a few other companies. KOW was an example where 2-Bit I always thought was kind of influenced by that. But I could definitely see, like, there was the one promo, I think it was with, I want to say, the Wrecking Crew, when you were feuding with them, maybe when Cutter just took over, they were in the balcony. They were kind of like by the stairs. I always thought that was very like ECW influenced. Then I thought there was the one promo, I want to say, was it with Synergy or was it with the Worst Tag Team? I felt it was like, I saw the like resemblances. I saw the influences. So I could definitely, like, to Mikey Fitzgerald's point, and we'll get Mikey on here in the next week or so. I'll definitely reach out to Mike because I definitely want to speak to him. I could definitely see like that influence of like ECW, because I always even say it to this day. I think more people are influenced in one way or another ECW than even WCW or WWF, because what ECW did was they broke all the rules. and everybody borrowed off ECW. McMahon himself borrowed off it. WCW borrowed off when they had the goofy hardcore matches, and also the cruiserweight scene. That all came from ECW. That was Heyman's idea at the very beginning. Let's get the wrestlers from Mexico. Let's get those wrestlers from Japan. He did all that stuff. You think about Tanaka, that was an ECW. You think about Tajiri was another example. All those wrestlers that came overseas, whether it was from Mexico, Japan, that was Heyman's idea. WCW borrowed it. The WWF with all the panties and the TNA, that was all ECW. That goes back to obviously Beulah, that goes back to Francine, that goes back to Kimona Wananala, that goes back to all those females that all started in ECW. So at the end of the day, I always say it, everybody borrowed from ECW. It's like if you're a musician, you borrowed off Jimi Hendrix, or if you're a rapper, you borrowed off, obviously, NWA, you borrowed off Notorious B.I.G., you borrowed off Tupac. I mean, it's like you borrowed off somebody. So at the end of the day, Mike, we all borrowed off ECW. So trust me, we all borrowed from it. But before I get out of here and get closing thoughts, I could talk with you for hours. I know I'm going to get you back on here regularly, so I got a feeling we're going to continue to talk about you. But before we get out of here, champ, I want to ask you this question. Is there anything that you want to say to Jack Roberts first? I want to get it before I say anybody else that's going to buy a ticket Saturday. Is there anything else that you have, any closing thoughts that you'd like to say to Jack Roberts before Saturday night?
Well, Jack, you've got your opportunity. You've impressed the management of LWF, but most importantly, you've impressed me. I ain't going to be taking you lightly, but you're going to need to bring your A game, mate, because this championship right here, I ain't planning on losing it anytime soon. So, as I said earlier, bring a lunch. It's going to be a long night for you.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I'm Jack Roberts of Synergy, I would tread very lightly. I would pay attention to what our top of the table, Raynaldo, has just said, because he's the reigning, defending LWF champion for a reason. And those words, what he does in the ring, I would, like I said, tread very lightly. And we can't wait for this match and many other matches coming up here this Saturday for the LWF's Winter of Discontent. Champ, is there anything else that you want to say to anybody that's going to come and see you this Saturday and buy a ticket?
Yeah, just again, thanks for supporting the LWF. Thanks for supporting me. If you're a fan of Raynaldo, I greatly appreciate it. I know it sounds cheesy or trite to say, but you guys are my 12th man, and the extra that you give me in the ring is phenomenal. And I thank you for your support, and so does the LWF. If you get a ticket to this show and you've not been to our shows before, you're going to enjoy it. There's something for everyone. The talent that the LWF have, we put on a show like no other in the Northwest wrestling scene or the UK wrestling scene. So you're in for a treat. And there's a lot of tag teams on offer. So they're looking towards cementing the tag team division. So you've also got that to look forward to as well. And I think they've just announced an interesting females contest, women's bout. Harley Hudson against Jenny B, who's not been around the LWF for a while now. So that's going to be an interesting bout. So get your tickets, come on down, and you are going to be in for a night of brilliant wrestling action.
Ladies and gentlemen, I like to be the 13th man because we got the 12th man for Raynaldo, but I'm going to be the 13th man here coming up here Saturday night because I could not wait for this card. And of course, again, the LWF, please give them a follow on Twitter at LWF, the Instagram, the LWF Wrestling. Also like the Facebook page for the LWF. Also give Raynaldo a follow on Twitter at Raynaldo9. Also give him a follow on Instagram. Keep updated with all the great things that he is doing. We'll also be speaking about the card here Friday night because we'll get Nate Reese's reactions. We'll certainly get the Asset Stephen Cross's reactions on some of these things and much, much more. And I'm sure the guys will have a lot to say about what you had to say. And Champ, before I get out of here, do you have any other closing thoughts? Anything else you want to say on your mind? Feel free. And I can't wait to have you back on after you retain the championship and go to the next one. We'll talk more things. Maybe we'll talk Royal Rumbles from the past. We'll talk about anything else on your mind. So I want to give you the floor, and I can't thank you enough, and fire away.
Okay, before I get to some thank yous of my own, just mentioning Stephen Cross there, I noticed that he put a little post about my last interview. Kind words or just smart? I say Stephen Cross, both. I'm not a dummy, but they are kind words, and I mean them. But don't take my kindness for weakness, is all I'll say.
Whoa! Stephen Cross, the asset, was speaking Friday night.
Yeah.
In just a short speech there, Raynaldo has said a lot. I can't wait to get your reactions to that. So that's going to be something.
Stephen Cross is a phenomenally talented wrestler, and I'm sure he'll be in the title picture sooner rather than later. I'd say he's on the ascension, definitely. I'm just having a little fun there, but yeah, no, I want to shout out to the LWF, shout out to Steve Bibby, shout out to Jack Roberts, my opponent, because I'm gonna enjoy mixing it up with him because there's a lot of similarities in our journey and a lot of similarities in our style. So it's going to be interesting to get in the ring with him. Big shout out to yourself, Tom, because giving us the platform, giving us the promotion, and for shouting us out on Twitter as well the other day. As well, myself and Stephen and RP Davis giving us a shout out on Twitter. So it's greatly appreciated for
my pleasure.
For you being on the other side of the world to come and do this and speak with us all and promote the UK wrestling scene. It's phenomenal. I can't thank you enough. And for such a Paul Heyman-esque rousing introduction at the beginning and for having me on the show again. Can't thank you enough, brother.
Well, listen, it's a tremendous honor and anything I can do for you guys. And again, shout out to the natural born fighter, RP Davis. He has been a great friend. I've known him now for just about a year. He's been on here many, many times. So I had to make sure, even though he wanted me to do it just for the natural born fighter, RP Davis, I'm like, I just spoke with Raynaldo. He's the world champion. How could I not include him? And the asset Stephen Cross, he's my guy. I mean, I've known him now a long time. I speak with him every week. So if I don't include him, I'm going to hear it. So I got to include all three. I know all three of us haven't been in the ring with each other yet, but you know what? At the end of the day, if progress is going to take on a wrestler, how could I not leave out the natural born fighter, RP Davis? How could I not leave out the asset Stephen Cross? And most importantly, our reigning, defending LWF world champion who's going to be in action here this Saturday night. That is, of course, our top of the table, Raynaldo. My friend, Happy New Year. Good luck. Go get him out there. Bring it home. That crowd's going to carry you. I know it. You are going to get the job done. I can't wait to speak with you here in a few weeks, and we'll get ready for the next match, and we'll talk some more memories, and keep up the good work. Congratulations. Happy New Year, and go get him out there.
Thank you, Tom. Happy New Year to you, mate, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you again. Cheers.
You sure will. As we're here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show with our reigning, defending world champion of the LWF. He is on top of the table. That is Raynaldo. As I am the host of the Sports Report and the station manager here at Sportswire Radio, the Reverend Tom Bryce. And if you're on sportnarium.com/player, we'll be back on here in a little while with the head coach of the women's volleyball team for our Five-Town Sound College team. That is Christy Herring. So stay tuned. We'll be back on here in about an hour and 45 minutes. But in the meantime, we will be back here with more LWF Talk Friday night with Wildfire Nate Reese. We'll get his reactions to what Raynaldo had to say. And, of course, the asset Stephen Cross, who have a lot to say, I'm sure, on the LWF's Winter of Discontent, and most especially what the top of the table Raynaldo had to say about him. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that. That'll be all at about 10 o'clock UK time, so about 5 p.m. Eastern time here in New York, 10 p.m. UK time, sportnarium.com/player. In the meantime, we were just with our world champion, Raynaldo, just hours away before his big match against Jack Roberts of Synergy at the Winter of Discontent for the LWF. I am the host of the Sports Report and the station manager here of Sportswire Radio. Good night, everybody, and we'll be back here Friday night with more LWF talk with Wildfire Nate Reese and the asset Stephen Cross. Okay, let's take that out.